Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming. It's great to see so many people here for an important event, particularly on a day when I wasn't sure if I'd be able to see anybody. For those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting before, I'm Henry Weinstein. I'm one of the faculty members here. Just going to make a couple of brief comments. When I was in high school, I heard...
Can you go into the mic? We're being asked from audience.
Well, I'll speak a little louder. What I was about to say was when I was in high school, I heard President John Kennedy give a speech on the threat of nuclear war and the interconnectedness of people around the world. At the time, President Kennedy said, "Our most basic common link is that we all inhabit the planet, we all breathe the same air, we all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal." I remember thinking as a teenager growing up in smoggy Los Angeles what a profound message that was. And I, as someone who grew up in a very smoggy place, I've been thinking about air quality for years. But I have never thought quite so much about the air we breathe as I have in the past few weeks because of coronavirus. So I feel like we are particularly fortunate, if only coincidentally, to have a guest speaker today, Colette Pichon Battle, who has been working vigorously on air quality and a bevy of other major environmental issues for years. So, and to introduce Colette, we have another vigorous environmental advocate here, Abby Reyes, who runs resilience programs at UCI and teaches a class on law and social movements, race, planet, and climate change. Abby, take it away.
Thank you, Henry. Oh, come on. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Together with Henry, I offer a very warm and special welcome to Colette Pichon Battle. Colette is a Louisiana native. She is the executive director of the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy, working on issues of global migration, community economic development, climate justice, and equitable disaster recovery. She has prioritized working with local communities, national funders, and elected officials around equity in the post-Hurricane Katrina, post-BP disaster Gulf Coast. In addition to developing advocacy initiatives that intersect with race, systems of power, and ecology, Colette manages the center's legal services in immigration and disaster law. In 2019, Colette was named an Obama Fellow for her work with Black and Native communities on the front line of climate change. In 2018, she was awarded with an honorary doctorate from Kenyon College. In 2016, she was named a White House Champion of Change for Climate Equity. And in 2015, she was selected as an Echoing Green Climate Fellow, a fellowship opportunity that many of you should be looking into as you embark on this next stage post-law school. Under Colette's leadership, the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy co-coordinated Gulf South Rising in 2015, which was a regional initiative to advance climate justice and just transition in the South, and currently co-chairs the National Water Equity and Climate Resilient Caucus with PolicyLink. The center also currently anchors the 5-state multi-issue initiative called Gulf South for a Green New Deal. We've brought Colette to UC Irvine Law today to share with us her perspectives on climate justice as social justice. As Colette's stories from the Gulf South attest, the legal minds produced there in post-Hurricane Katrina Gulf South are poised to lead the nation in matters of race, place, and climate change, as other regions like ours increasingly and more directly begin to confront climate chaos. Lawyers and advocates around the country can benefit greatly from the opportunity to share skills and learn from Gulf South leadership. In this context, we're bringing Colette here today to work together with me and Professor Angela Harris from UC Davis Law as we embark with a team of others on planning an anticipated national just transition movement lawyering training and symposium for late 2020 and early 2021. I see some of you shaking your heads. If you as students are interested in being involved in that work, there is plenty to do. Please enjoy today's talk. As you listen, let yourself go ahead and form the questions and connections that arise from what Colette is saying. Let's be sure during Q&A to surface those questions and connections so that we here together can honor and build upon the invitation that Colette is offering to mobilize around this set of challenges and opportunities that is shaping our collective future. Like, let's use this time in a real way. We're going to listen to Colette first, but then what is the conversation that only the people in this room can have? I want you to think about your place in that conversation and make sure that we're using our Q&A time in a way that harnesses it. Thank you. Colette.
All right. I've got a microphone on, and I don't know where the people in the other world are. Hello?
It's also being live streamed. We're trusting that that's working. Oh, it's through this.
Are we on the interwebs? Hey, y'all, peace. Peace, everybody. Before we get started, let's see if I can make one gesture. Does anyone know the indigenous land that we're on? Whose land we're on here at UC Irvine? Can someone just tell me out loud? Which tribes? Say it one more time. Ahashimen
and Tongva.
Ahashimen and Tongva. Okay.
Shared unceded territory.
Great. So let's, if you have a water, if you could just grab your water. We're going to take a sip together. That's all we're going to do. It's all right. Just go with it. Let's try it out. And so we're just going to honor the land that we're on, the unceded territory of these two tribes with a sip. Thank you. Part of what we like to do with the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy, but also everywhere we go, is to just acknowledge the land that we're on and the traditions that I come from. Honoring with pouring out a little water or taking a sip of water or taking even a breath is good enough, especially when you can't be in direct communication with folks to seek permission. So I just want to make a little bit of an acknowledgement before we get started. Thank y'all. Y'all did great. So there's a strange Southern woman in your midst, and we'll be doing strange things all throughout this conversation. I see we're already breaking rules. You're closer than 6 feet to each other now. So I like it. It's a radical group. This is my people. Thank you so much. I'm feeling you. I am going to talk a little bit today. I think Abby's going to give me a sign at, 15 minutes? Okay. So we'll talk a little bit. I've got lots to say. You'll see I'm one of those people with just, I could go forever. But what I'm always most interested in when I get to speak with students is just where y'all are at and what's on your mind. There is an ongoing climate crisis that cannot be solved by a PowerPoint presentation, and it's going to take your generation really engaged in this, and so I'm looking forward to learning from you as well. I have some things to offer. Abby told me I could be honest, which is good. That's the way I like to be. But if I'm going to be honest, I may say some things that hit you a little hard, maybe knock a little wind out of you. That's all right. That means you're alive. It means you can hear me. And so I'm asking you to have a little courage in this conversation. And I'm also asking for a little bit of grace. I've got a lot of growing to do. I'm learning as well. I'm way older than y'all, but it turns out this learning thing keeps going on and on and on as we move. So asking for your grace as well. I had some technical difficulties. We shall make do with this here PowerPoint, and that is just how that will be. I just want to bring some things to your attention, and then we'll go from there. I started this work in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, and is everyone in here a law student? Who's not a law student? Okay. We'll get you after you finish. We got somewhere for you to go. It's totally fine. We'll work that out. Yes, I'm in favor of everyone going to law school, especially if you're black, brown, or female. We'll talk about it. But that is what I would like for you to do. Great. I'm very dictatorial, as you'll find. I have problems expressing myself as well. So I got into this work after Hurricane Katrina, and I was actually in corporate law pre-Katrina. And then went home and saw just some terrible stuff happening and was really wondering where was the justice piece of law, right? Isn't law about justice? Isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? I was also very confident in my country and my country's ability to respond to disaster. I was confident in, the systems being in place for me and my family to recover and to get what we need, but I found out the hard way that we're not in that space. And so my role as a lawyer went from sort of corporate law and helping corporations make money to movement lawyering, which is what I'm excited to land on and convince all of you to go to law school if you are not already there. So the first thing is I work in climate justice, and we're going to just take a minute to define what I'm talking about. Everybody, climate change is real.
We're there.
Oh, we're in California. Oh my God, I totally forgot where I was. I'm from Louisiana, so we got to start with that one, and that takes 25 to 30 good minutes to get through that one. So that's good. We'll skip ahead. So climate change is real. Yes, that's where we're starting. And the climate justice movement necessarily intersects with lots of other systems. And so the work that I do is climate justice work. I do not do environmental justice. Most people think, that becomes one of those synonymous words when you see like a black person in environmental work. You're like, oh, they're environmental justice. That's not me. I'm the random black girl in the climate field. The rooms I'm in are still very white. The environmental justice rooms are very brown and black, which is good, but not so good. But the work I do is around climate justice, and I'm specifically working on what is happening to the climate. The difference between the two is the environmental justice work is specifically about pollutions, pollutants, cleaning things up, really sort of challenging those justice issues. Turns out that the same things poisoning those people are the same things messing up the planet, but they are two different areas of work that come together in different places. I'm in the climate space, and I can get you in touch with some great environmental justice folks if you want to talk with them. So let me just tell you what I'm saying when we talk about climate justice. We're talking about a vision. We're talking about a vision to lessen and dissolve the unequal burdens created by climate change. Climate justice recognizes and addresses that those who are least responsible for climate change are going to receive its greatest impacts. Climate justice is an ethical issue. This is about law, and law is about ethics, and you'll learn that right around your first semester, your first year of law school. And it's actually a really important thing to think about ethical issues right now as we go through this moment in time in our country where we can't hug each other, shake hands, or who's being blamed for things, and where we go. It's important for us to understand which ethical issues are amongst us, and which are issues that are symptoms of a deeper ethical concern. And justice has to be the basis of genuine, systematic, and transformative solutions that tackle the real causes of climate change. And so for those of you who've seen any of my work, you know that I do not believe that the real cause of climate change is CO2 emissions. That is not what we're talking about. We're talking about something much more deep and sinister than CO2 emissions, which are by themselves neutral actors in a world that they don't control. We have to get to some real understanding. For those of you in law school, I've got some ideas, full of them actually, so if you want to just join the revolution, here's what we're going to do. We've got to get some national, legally binding declaration on the climate crisis from our country. Here we are, waiting on other people to move, and let me tell you something, if you want to be in the streets, please vote for whoever you're going to vote for, but after you do that, put your energy behind making sure whoever is in that office makes a declaration that there is a crisis happening in our country right now, and we are disproportionately responsible for what is happening to the planet. And if we don't get this declaration and this understanding, we're going to keep moving from the sort of temperature that, we can engage or we can not engage. But we're past that point, y'all. We're past that point. And we have to get this declaration as part of our national responsibility. We need to establish and advance enforceable human rights standards across all aspects of our U.S. legal system. We do not, you are not, there is no way to legally advocate for your human rights in this country because we don't recognize them. This is why we need more lawyers. This is why I need y'all to go to law school. This is what we have to fight for, because what we are facing with climate change, even with this current situation, are things that we cannot anticipate, and the law only allows you to protect what has been delineated. We need to have human rights and people-centered human rights because we are going into a time that we've never faced before. There are going to be rights and laws that we need to have in place because we are now in a situation where we have discovered them. The human rights standard is the standard we have to move from. That has to be our baseline. Civil rights has got to be a little bit of like icing on the cake, and we can even do more with that. But human rights has got to be the base standard that we move from. We've got to dismantle structural racism. That'll be easy. We can do that by tomorrow. And once we do that, meet me at the bar for a drink. I'd be excited to buy you all around. We've got to dismantle structural racism throughout all of the United States systems. We'll talk about structural racism. I know I'm in California. I'm going to assume you know what I'm talking about, except I saw what happened during y'all's fires. I saw who was out in the bad end of that situation. I saw who got to leave. I saw who had to stay. And I think it might not just be the South who has this problem. We might have to have a national conversation about structural racism, and so we'll have that today. We've got to shift mass consumption and mass production of this, and it's imperative for global capitalism. As I drink my Starbucks coffee, which I swear to God, I just really need it because I just haven't had one in a few days, so I'm sorry about my mass consumption right now, but I needed it. But my coffee is not the problem, right? It's these very large stores with very stocked shelves of everything we could possibly need whenever we need it, in the middle of the night, out of season. These are the types of mass production that we are responsible for around the globe, while, by the way, other people are without food or without shelter, but we've got more than enough. This mass consumption is what we're going to have to address, and we're going to have to advance a just transition away from this. It's all rooted in extractive economies. We're going to have to go towards something much more sustainable. And by the way, since we're just talking light and, airy, fluffy things, let's just give reparations where they are due. I know that's not a topic that we often hear, but the reparations movement that's being led by many Black-led organizations nationally and has been going on since I was in law school, which was a very long time ago, and even before that, that reparations conversation about what Black people in this country deserve for stolen wages and generational wealth that has been developed for other people, that conversation is now relevant to the climate conversation because globally, I was just in Spain in December, globally what's being talked about is what the U.S. owes to the rest of the world for its damage to what's happening now around climate change. This is climate reparations. So when we talk about reparations in the U.S., we have to understand that it necessarily impacts what reparations are going to look like globally, and we need to start moving on this stuff because there are people, countries, and other communities that are already suffering the consequences. I just like to put Greta up. She makes me happy. I like to see how people are going to react to Greta. Oh, there's Greta. Dear Greta, I like Greta. Here's my question. And people get my question wrong because they just kind of get my attitude, but they don't hear what I'm saying. So try to hear me on this one. I'm wondering why it took a Swedish white girl to get the attention of the world on a global crisis that people have been screaming about for a really long time. I'm not mad at Greta. Thank you, Greta. Thank you for getting the attention of the white people who just don't like to hear the Black people scream in agony and pain. Thank you, Greta. I appreciate that. But what does it say about our country that that's what it takes? You can let the voices of communities for generations go unheard, invisibilized, and just completely silent, but a young Swedish white girl can come and the world kicks up. The nation is ready. All of a sudden, climate change is at the front, and everywhere I go, everybody's citing Greta, so I'm going to cite Greta too. Thank you, Greta. But I just want you to know, I don't have Greta in my community. The girls in my community, they don't have long hair and blue eyes and things like that, but they have a right to the same humanity that Greta is fighting for. And as we move around climate justice, it's important for us not to just advance these stereotypes, not to just advance the oppression and the social imbalance that we have as we move forward on this. It's important that you hear all the voices, the Gretas and the Takimas, okay? I need to make sure that we're listening to everybody because that's how big this situation is. My work, as I mentioned, started in Hurricane Katrina, and I basically just wondered, who, if not us, who has the right to remain? Who has the right to return? Who has the right to recover when a big storm like this comes and knocks out 3 states coastwide? I've talked to a couple people already who have been down to the coast, who've been down to Mississippi, been down to New Orleans, Some of you have friends who volunteered or family who volunteered. There were lots of people really paying attention. But there was one question that I asked as a lawyer, which is, why isn't recovery the same for everybody? Why is it that when black folks said they were going to stay in the public housing projects in New Orleans, which were, by the way, on high ground and were not going to flood, why were they evacuated by the police at gunpoint? And then why were the wealthy people uptown New Orleans able to sit on their porch with a glass of wine and declare that they weren't leaving, and they be allowed to stay? Who gets to stay? Who gets to come back? When I watched there are lawsuits, you can read about them as you go to law school. Those of you who are not there yet, I'm going to keep saying that, by the way. I don't know if everybody, you're going to get it. By the end of this, you're going to be enrolling in law school. But when you go to law school, please look up this case. There are cases that, there was a parish called St. Bernard Parish, and the housing case was discrimination for people coming back. It said only people who had relatives in St. Bernard Parish could come back to St. Bernard Parish. Keep that in mind as we deal with more global migration. But St. Bernard Parish is notoriously white, notoriously racist. And what they were saying, without any sort of direct statement, is we don't want people who are not related to the people who are already here back. Who gets to come back? Who gets to stay? Who gets to come back? Who gets to recover? A million types of discrimination is what I was seeing, and I couldn't believe it because I felt like, well, clearly we must just not know better. But it turns out this is how we respond to disasters in general, which is why I say I was checking out what happened over here with these wildfires, and it looked like the same people who got left over here were the same people who got left in Katrina. I think we need to have a conversation about how our systems work or don't work for particular people and why that is, and why we stand for it and what we have to do to shift it. I understood with my eyes that the difference between the people who could remain, who could recover, who could return, was a difference around race. And race, my friends, is really a key issue to figuring out this climate justice solution. We're going to have to deal with it, and this is the thing that nobody likes to deal with. Nobody likes to talk about it. You feel blamed. Please don't, it's not me, it was my grandparent. I get it, I totally get it, I get what you're saying. But we have to have the courage to engage in conversations around race, or we're going to get nowhere. We're going to get nowhere. We're going to make things that will break. We're going to make things that will sink. We're going to make things that get dismantled if we don't deal with this one topic, which makes everybody uncomfortable. You walk out feeling like you need a shower, but that's good because the coronavirus tells us we got to shower at least like twice a day, so it's good, it's good. Let's talk about race, go shower, come back, and let's get this going. Well, here, there's we do a deep presentation around race. I don't have time to do it today, so let me tell you the findings. These are the expert findings of Colette Pichon Battle. Race is not real. It's not real. Turns out there's 99.9% similarity between all human beings because we're of the same technical race. I mean, we've got pigmentation differences, but race and our biological similarity is we're humans are identical. Like, we're humans. You're human, I'm human. We look a little different, but everybody can't be this cute. You know what I'm saying? And that's okay. That's all right. You know, why should we discriminate against that? That's not what we should do. It's a social construct. Okay, it was created. It's a social construct. It was created by humans, and it's on no basis of biology. Keep that in mind, because there's more. It can shift over time. Any Italians in the room? Yeah? Don't want to identify yourself? It's okay. I know you're in here. I see you, brother. I know they probably don't like y'all right now either, huh? They going after y'all and the Chinese folks. That's all right. I like the Italians, brother. Good to see you. Any Irish? That's good. I see y'all Irish folks. By the way, I just went to Ireland last year. Shout out to the Irish. Y'all some radical people, man. I didn't know. I got respect. Any Jewish people in here? Welcome, welcome. Here's the news. Turns out, you're not white. At least you didn't used to be white. You used to be with us. And I want to say to you today, come on back. They don't need you. You should just come to the other side, right? That's the other. You're not white, you're other, because that's what race is based on. How close are you? How accepted are you to whiteness? That's what this is about. And you have to keep this in mind because when you look at the legal documents, it doesn't say what blackness is, it says what whiteness is or what whiteness is not, and that's the point, that's where we have to start understanding race. Italians, Irish, Jewish folks, at one point you were a whole other race, and now you are in the white race because race is not real and it can shift over time because somebody just made it and they can just declare it. That's what's happening. Race categories are generally determined by the dominant group. That means I cannot declare today that I'm a white woman. You know, I might feel it inside of me, but I can't declare it because I don't have that social power. The mainstream gets to determine who's who, right? So when someone says I am such and such, the only real question is what does the mainstream accept you to be, right? It's not who you are, it's who does the mainstream determine that you are, that dominant group. All of this stuff is true. I wouldn't lie to you. I feel like we're really close friends right now, so let me tell you, it's not real. It shifts, it moves, it's determined by somebody else, but let me tell you, friends, it has real consequences. And this is what makes this so difficult. Because I'm telling you this thing is not real, I'm telling you it's invisible, and I'm telling you it's a moving target, and now I'm telling you to solve it. This is going to be tough. This is going to take more than courage. This is going to take some smart people figuring out some things that make no sense or that you've been socialized to believe make no sense. But guess what makes no sense? Race. And it really makes no sense in a time of a climate crisis. We've got to get this figured out because if we don't figure out this question, at some point you will be in the range of the target, even if you're not the person who's targeted by racial discrimination. What are some consequences of race? Structural racism. Folks familiar with this term? See some head nods, no? Yeah. This is an actual term, and it's important for you to understand it, and I'm going to give you a definition from the Aspen Institute, which is as middle of the road as you can get, okay? I'm trying to be as nice to you very sensitive people as I can be, okay? Now, when we meet at the bar, I'm not going to give you this definition, so you only get it here in the classroom. But let me tell you what we're talking about. When we talk about structural racism, we're not talking about whether or not you like Colette, whether or not you think Colette is a black person you don't want to be around. That's not what we're talking about. That's individual racism. Not much I can do about that. I'm sure I could convince you to like me. I'm a very likable person. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is a system in which public policies, laws, why we need you to go to law school, public policies, institutional practices, UC, your institutional practices, what, 12 campuses? That's what I heard? Y'all got 10? Okay, 10 at 30,000 a grip? Let me tell you, this institution is a part of the social structure of your society. Cultural representations and other social norms work in various, often reinforcing ways to perpetuate race group inequity. Think about it. How do the laws and the practices perpetuate what you have been told is true, but is not actually true? That's what you're fighting. It's a subtle racialized patterns in policies, in the practices, all throughout our political, economic, and social systems that we have to deal with. They generate differences in well-beings between people of color and whites. Remember, white is that's the target here. That's what everybody's measured against. Are you white? And where do you get to go from there? Structural racism maintains the existing racial hierarchy. Now I have to pause here because sometimes we don't understand the racial hierarchy. I've got a very complicated demonstration to show you. It's my two hands. The race hierarchy. If one side is white, just on color, then the other side is necessarily, thank you, black. White, black. It's just the dichotomy of the thing, okay? What you have to understand is that the race hierarchy turns itself topward, and white is at the top, black is where? At the bottom. So if black is at the bottom and white is at the top, the hierarchy becomes who's closer to black, who's closer to white. This is not about white people being mean to black people. This is about who in the racial hierarchy can oppress who's below them. And this is where you get to the model minorities. This is where you get to the light-skinned brown folks. This is where you get to the folks who come in that can look one way but are another. That hierarchy is part of our cultural structure, and you have to understand that hierarchy because you have to break it down. This is what I say to folks all the time about understanding anti-black racism. If you don't challenge anti-black racism, you can still end up with a hierarchy that oppresses people, even if you take all the white people out. Because you have still that hierarchy of whiteness, toward whiteness. Whoever's closest to whiteness has the most access, has the most power. That's what we're dealing with. So we got to break down that whole system. And this structural racism maintains that hierarchy. It says, even if we take all the white people out of the equation, it says those closest to white now have the opportunity and privilege to oppress people below them. Y'all with me? Y'all okay? Y'all all right? We need a sip of water? All right, we're in California. We liberal out here. Let's go. All right. All right. Race consequence, land and people. You know, this, I usually ask people, when was America founded? I know y'all already know that that's a trick question. And it is a trick question. Because look at this. And what we have to understand is that there were entire nations here. And everything that you have, every place that you stand, every place that you lay your head is on what used to be somebody else's territory. And you've got to understand that, because sometimes, especially on the left, we just point at those other people for doing bad things. But let's be clear. We are all maintaining a structure here. We're all playing a role here. I don't need you to get bogged down and feeling bad about it. That's not helpful. That's not helpful. We do have to have some analysis around ourselves, but being stuck in guilt is not where I want you to be. We need some folks in the movement. So I need you to catalyze yourself, but with some awareness, because we are on stolen land. You are getting your education, this great, beautiful education, on stolen land. You know what you got to do to people to take their land? Think about it. What would somebody have to do to take your house from you? Think about it. That's what they had to do to take this land. And that's where we are, and that's what we're benefiting from every day, and we cannot forget that, because we'll just forget history and focus on climate change in the future, and we've got to deal with this stuff, y'all, or else we'll never get to the place where we need to be. I showed that slide, and I showed this one because this is the state of Native American reservations as of 2010. This is just federal recognized. Native American folks are with us everywhere. They are found everywhere, but I want you to see the territory control. And I want you to understand that there are hundreds of thousands of nations that have been eradicated so that we can have the privilege that we have today. That means we have a responsibility. If you're going to get this education, if you're going to go to law school, and I know you're going to go, that means you have a responsibility. You have a responsibility to help make some of this stuff right. And we've got to get this right, because this is part of climate justice. If you think we can just reduce CO2 emissions and everything's going to be okay, you are mistaken. You are incorrect. We have to hit these things, and we got to hit them, and it's going to take a lot of courage. It's going to take a lot of heart. It's going to take some self-work. You're going to have to actually go look in the mirror and change yourself a little bit. A little bit. You don't have to get mad about it or feel sad about it, but you're going to have to change yourself a little bit. Some of the race consequences are redlining. Anybody heard of redlining? Y'all know what I'm talking about? Basically, where do banks fund people to have their mortgages, because houses cost a lot of money? Who can get access to the mortgage? There's a practice that started a long time ago, and it is why we saw what we saw in New Orleans, right? You don't just see people in the water because they want to be. People were in a flood zone because that's where they had to be. And by the way, they couldn't get any money to be anywhere else. They couldn't get in the communities they wanted to get in. And by the way, the communities that they were in, put them together by race. People talk about the lower Ninth Ward. I don't know if y'all have heard about this place. I'm like, oh, those poor black people in the lower Ninth Ward. Those people were black middle class. They weren't poor. They owned their homes. They weren't allowed to own homes in the high ground. Guess who lives there? Anybody want to guess? That's right. That's right. Somebody's got courage. I see you, sister. Somebody's got courage. This is the white folks get the high ground, the black folks get the low ground. This is that race hierarchy I'm talking about. They're not just drowning because they didn't leave New Orleans. They're drowning because they could not live anywhere else. Where we live and the places we're allowed to go have an impact, especially as we deal with climate change. When those fires come, when this storm comes, it will matter where you are situated. And you've got to understand that these things are connected. Another race consequence is poverty. Let's see how courageous you are. This is going to be fun. All right, California. Let me set my caffeine before we go on. All right, California. This is a map of the black concentration in the United States as of the 2010 census. Dark means a lot, light means a little bit. Where are the black people in this South? Mississippi. That's good eyes. That is actually the largest population of black folks is Mississippi. Yeah, South. Can we agree to South? Pretty much South, Southeast, okay. Why are they there? Yeah, so say it a little louder, whoever did. Slavery. Is that you again? You know what? We're going to be friends. We're going to be friends. Courageous in the back. Slavery. Thank you, sister. Slavery, y'all. You can't be scared to say it. This is our reality. You can't say it low. This is our reality. And you can't be bogged down by guilt about it because this is our reality. People are not choosing to just live in the Southeast because it's just better. It is quite lovely. So it's fantastic. The weather's great. The food fantastic. But this is something deeper. This is not free will. This is legacy. And this is the legacy of slavery. And you have to think about this because poverty is actually connected to place and race, right? The highest percentages of people living below the poverty rate are in these 10, 11 places. So let's just call them out in case you can't read, because you forgot your glasses. Mississippi, friend, who picked out Mississippi as the place with the highest concentration, also turns out Mississippi, number 1 on the poverty line. Arkansas, Kentucky, Alabama, Texas, Louisiana, Tennessee, South Carolina, Georgia. This is not a coincidence. This is not a coincidence. You have to understand that race is absolutely an indicator of income. I want to just shout out 2 states right queasy, as we say down in Louisiana. West Virginia, why are they up here? Why is West Virginia, who lives in West Virginia? They have at least 2 black people in West Virginia, I'm sure of it. But I don't think that's who they're counting. Who lives in, what is this area, West Virginia? Appalachia, anybody heard of Appalachia? These are poor white folks. And if you do a little history, shout out to the Irish folks who I'm learning more about, these are, a lot of them, immigrant labor, pulled into a workforce. We'll see where that shows up again. I know y'all know what I'm talking about. Poverty, high poverty levels. New Mexico, who's in New Mexico? There are at least 5 black people in New Mexico. But I don't think that's who we're counting. Who are we counting in New Mexico? The tribes. Because the poorest of everybody are these indigenous nations. And we got to remember that and go back to that map that I showed earlier, because this is something where they used to have access to land and environment and could maintain themselves, relegated now to reservations has also relegated them to a life of poverty, really. Some people don't believe me. Some people like to say, but Colette, it's really about class. I always get that, especially at the institutions with the smart people. It's true. It's true. Class is a factor. But let me be clear. Your race will determine your lifespan, your engagement with the police, your health predictions. When I had to think about coronavirus and getting on an airplane, I had to think actually, I'm at higher risk just for being black. Just for being black. Because our health indicators are connected to our race. But this is a study from 2016. There are 3 lines up here. The top line is white. The middle line is Latino, and black is at the bottom line. Before we get to the black and Latino folks, let me just point out that $1.2 million line for the white folks. This is the projected trajectory to 2043. They can already project out where white people's income will be. And they can project out where Latino and black people's income will be. Now that middle line is Latino. It's not very much higher than the black line, but let me bring back the race hierarchy. Because the only thing closer than black people to white is Latino to white. That's that hierarchy I'm talking about. Who gets closer? Now, they're not close enough, clearly. My line, the line I worry about is that black line, that one at the bottom. We are pretty stagnant. Stagnant. This is not about bootstraps. This is not about bootstraps. This is not about people making individual choices. This is a system that can predict where black income will be, and if you think this is of no consequence, let me tell you that when a climate disaster comes, when a fire comes, when a hurricane comes, you need to get out of there. That assumes you have the resources to get out. That assumes you have the resources to be out of work for a few days. That assumes you have the resources to feed yourself, feed your baby, and feed anybody else with you. You will not have those resources if this is your projected income line. The climate impacts on black people will be far worse than they will be on others. And that's why we have to start there. That's why we start there. That's why we have to work there, because it is about income, but income in this country can be directly connected to your race. Another race consequence is environmental racism. This is a technical term. When you go to law school, there's this thing, they say term of art. This is a term of art. Environmental racism is defined as the disproportionate impact of environmental hazards on communities of color or low socioeconomic status. It refers to the unequal protection, another clause that's in our Constitution. That means a constitutional violation. Refers to the unequal protection against toxic waste exposure, and it refers to the exclusion of these communities from their own decision making. Excuse me, Mr. Black person, would you like this very toxic thing next to your community? Thank you, Mr. White man. No, I would rather not have that toxic thing next to me. They don't get to choose like that. They don't get to say they don't want it. They buy their land. That land is devalued because of redlining, and that low-cost land becomes a place for foreign investment and or investment of extractive and polluting industries. You got to see it all together, or else you're going to miss it. You're going to focus on CO2 emissions, and that's not what this fight is about. This fight is about something much more systemic, and you've got to see those intersections, or else you're going to miss it. But let's talk about climate, because that's my thing. This is a map of global energy consumption, and the map exists because our energy consumption is what is driving our extraction, okay? We extract oil, gas, we put nuclear plants in because we want to run our energy. We want to have nice buildings with nice, comfortable air conditioning, just in case anybody wants to turn the air down for me. We want to have nice buildings with nice, comfortable things, but this is our global energy consumption. Maybe don't touch the thing. It looks like we're using enough. The dark is a lot. The light is a little bit. Who's using a lot? Great. I was just checking. Usually I hear, at the smart places, I usually hear China. That's true. China is using a lot. That's true. They also have like way more people. I'm just going to put that out there. Okay? I'm just saying. Per person, we use Americans, regular Americans, not even like the elite Americans, regular Americans, we use the amount of energy equal to 16 plus people, one American, one average American, 16 people. Your everyday energy usage is that of 16 people globally. So we got ourselves a problem because we can't get on picket lines and all kinds of protests if we're not willing to make some changes ourselves. And I'm not just talking about you recycling your stuff. I'm talking about us literally building and living in a way that uses less energy, a lot less energy. Before I go, the light is a little bit, and I just want to know who's not using a lot of energy. The Caribbean. Mm-hmm, I heard that accent too. The Caribbean is not. That's right. That's true. Shout out. What else? What was that? The Andes. Oh, that is true. I never looked at that before. Thank you. Yes, the Caribbean, the Andes, and there's a big continent called Africa over there. In case you can't see it. Can't see it because it doesn't have a lot of color on it. But let me tell you, it's there. The African nations will suffer the worst. And they are least responsible for what is happening. They have the lowest energy consumption, and they're going to suffer the worst. They're predicting deaths on heat. They're predicting deaths on heat alone. And look who's using the energy, and look who's going to die. This justice thing that we're talking about, that definition that we started off with, it said it acknowledges that the people who will feel it the worst are least responsible for this. What kind of accountability do we have to this continent? What are we supposed to be doing? living our lives, I hope you are very uncomfortable right now. I want you to be, because you know what? It's a lot of people uncomfortable while we're comfortable. So we can be comfortable. It's time for us to learn how to deal with a little discomfort. I say whiskey, but we'll talk about that later. This is CO2 emissions, because I know everybody likes to know. So let's just go there. Who's emitting lots of CO2? Yes, us and China. Us and China. The green, the dark is a lot, the green is a little bit. Who's releasing the least? It's Africa, the Caribbean, the Andes, one more time. Yes. This is the reality. This is what we're a part of. There are movements happening in order to address some of these systemic changes. I am honored to be on the leadership team and for the Movement for Black Lives policy table that is calling for reparations as part of our vision for Black lives. And we were in Madrid in December around loss and damages of the Paris Agreement, where the nations, the island nations, the nations that are feeling the impacts now are calling on the U.S. and other developed nations to pay their fair share as these folks get ready for what we know is coming. Something is coming. Thank you. Something is coming, and we got to get ready for it. We do not get ready for it by just chopping the symptoms. We're going to have to get to the root causes, and this one's going to make you uncomfortable because it's going to require you not just to shift yourself. You're going to have to shift this whole UC system. You're going to have to shift your family and all the families in California. You're going to have to shift your state and the whole nation on these items. Extractive economies. We're not just talking about extracting oil and gas. We're talking about extracting people out of their communities to put them into prison beds so that private prisons can make dollars off of beds filled. That's extractive. We're talking about reparations on an extractive philosophy that took people out of a continent and put them into work for nothing so they could build the wealth of other people who now blame them for their own poverty. We have to deal with this. The extractive philosophy is the philosophy of America. I take what I want and I leave the rest, and whatever happens, it's not up to me. Good luck. I hope you figure it out. That's the country we live in. That's the philosophy our country exists on. We need a whole nother generation who can see this a different way. And it's going to make a lot of people uncomfortable because once you get to a certain place, it's all right to oppress. That's what we think, but it's not all right. We have to stop mass production. We have to stop mass consumption. Lord have mercy, we got to stop white supremacy. Who, do I get to say Lord? I'm in California. I know y'all very, okay. I won't say Jesus, I'll just say Lord. Lord have mercy, we got to stop white supremacy, okay? This is tough because I'm not just talking about that guy over there who hates me. I'm talking about a system that privileges whiteness. That's the white supremacy we've got to challenge. And the whiteness also allows some of us who are in the hierarchy to benefit from it too. So we got to challenge it. We got to move it. We got to address racism. I'm sorry, we do. We cannot expect people to come to the picket lines for CO2 emissions when you did not show up when those black bodies were lying in the street. You cannot criticize them for not going to the Women's March when you are not at the hospital checking out these maternal mortality rates that show black women die more than in developing nations in this country. Where's the women's movement for the black women? Where is the climate movement for the black bodies in the streets? If we don't get this together, if we don't address this, we will not win. I'm not coming to your march until you come to mine. I've done a lot of stuff for you. It's your turn to come over to my spot. I got some shrimp and some whiskey. Let's make this happen. Okay? We gotta hit patriarchy. This is not just about men. This is about those of us women who have been taught to be male-like so that we can survive. But guess what, girls? Guess what, ladies? This whole globe needs the women to step it up a notch. This whole globe needs a feminist perspective on how we get out of this climate crisis. And it's not going to be replicating a male perspective. It's going to be you digging down into your most feminine self and being really proud of her and letting her shine herself into these solution spaces. We've got to deal with oppression generally. We've got to deal with oppression generally. Is litigation the answer to achieving climate justice? You're going to law school. I'm sorry, the answer to that question is no. Because the one thing you're going to be taught in law school is how good you are. You're so smart, you're so special, but guess what? You're probably smart, and I'm sure your parents think you're special. But we cannot have any more ego in this equation. You're going to go into an institution that tells you to believe in your ego. I'm going to tell you don't do it. In fact, go learn all the laws you can, and then learn also how to follow the front lines. Bring your assets and your information and your power to bear for the people who are fighting for their lives. Litigation is not the answer, but we need some people to sue these folks. Okay? I need deep litigation. I need millions of dollars back to the community. Yes, I will allow you to have a fancy car and a fancy house. If you get the money out of BP and make them feel some kind of profit loss, I shall grant you a vacation in a very beautiful tropical place in the Caribbean or in the Andes where they're not doing much global consumption. That's where you get to go. You get to sue them. And you got to sue the people who took my birds. Because they took your birds. Because these birds are flying from Canada, they flying from South America, they flying wherever, and when they stop, they stuck in oil. They're stuck in oil, and don't believe it, it's still there. Just in case they play commercials, because I know they play commercials out here. I've seen them. Everything's okay. They're lying to you. They're lying. And they're also lying about who had to clean this stuff up. Because let me be clear, the 13th Amendment that abolished slavery allows slavery. Slavery is still allowed in this country in jail. So racial profiling to put black people in jail means you are still practicing slavery, and guess what they do? They tell them to clean up the oil of the corporate polluter with no safety gear and no pay. That's what this is Louisiana. I didn't just find this on the internet. This is my state, where we incarcerate more people than anywhere in the globe. Yes. I need you in, or I need to know that you're out. So I know how to deal with you. And I want you to join me to confront oppression. If you don't join me to confront oppression, then at least tell me that you're supporting oppression so I know how to deal with you. I'm not going to be mean about it, but I am going to take you down. Okay? It's my goal in life. And just in case you're unsure, Colette, I feel you, but it's not my thing. I work on education or whatever. Let me tell you what Bishop Desmond Tutu said. He said, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have actually chosen the side of the oppressor. That's what Bishop Desmond Tutu said. When you don't act, when you stay in the middle, when you act like that the words I just said don't go anywhere in your heart, you are choosing the side of the oppressor. I don't need you to be out on the front lines with me, but somebody better retweet Greta or something. I need y'all you come in the game however you coming in the game, but don't sit quiet and don't sit idle. We cannot afford it. We need all of you. We need the next generation. This fight is going to go for generations, and the only thing that's going to save us are y'all in this room. Thank you.
Thank you, Colette.
All right.
May we know that some of you have class that begins in a couple minutes. It's okay if you need to leave. If you can, stay for a minute. We'll have one question.
Oh.
We're at one.
Sorry.
No,
Make it good, too.
I didn't stop you because
No.
we needed to get all the way through that
That's right.
thread.
Thank you.
Is there a question or a connection that you'd like to make? Maggie.
You've been talking about wanting to go to law school, and I think an issue that affects a lot of these disasters that you talk about a lot of the time is this concept of slow disaster. Like there's a lot of urgency to address this issue, but it's not being addressed with the urgency that we need. And the law is not the most urgent thing, although it can be when people want it to, and it helps out local people. But how would you suggest we try to alleviate the burdens, the time burdens of the legal system in addressing issues?
Thank you for that. How do we alleviate the time burdens of the legal system, given how long it takes the legal system to respond? The law is necessarily reactive. There's nothing innovative about the law. It absolutely requires a situation to respond to, and then society makes its regulations and guidelines from there. It's always behind. I do believe in law school, and I do believe in an army full of lawyers, but it's not because I believe the law